holding you back from touching the sky? What's holding you back? You gotta fly like an eagle and go high. What's holding you back from touching the sky? Oh, holding you back. You finally gotta reach for the sky. I was born to succeed, not to be a spoken the real. Told myself there's more to this than just waking up when I feel. So I made a commitment to turn my earnings up. Couldn't see myself as an employee, that still couldn't. Looked in the mirror, saw a spark in my eye. Knew I had to hustle and stop living a lie. I packed my dreams in a suitcase, took the first train. I'm headed for the horizon when success is no doubt.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of What's Holding You Back. My name is Rob McCray from the Business Building Network, and I am so excited to be with you one more time for another edition of What's Holding You Back. Yes, welcome to a bright and sunny Wednesday afternoon, as yes, we are already into the first week of the 8th month of August. I hope the month has been good to you so far. So we have a very important topic that we're going to be discussing today. So prepare yourself for that, as we're going to be talking about, are we witnessing the fall of the U.S. empire? And there is a lot of things that are going on currently throughout the world that will greatly impact the rest of the world and us here in the United States as well. And it brings up this very delicate discussion in which we're going to be having today. So please, by all means, leave us some feedback on this discussion. We would love to hear and see your comments and let us know what you are thinking about this current situation in which we are all involved with, and how this will impact us in the future weeks, months, and years to come. So please, by all means, as you're tuning in, leave us a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We would love to acknowledge you and welcome you to the broadcast. So let's get right into it, because we have a lot of information to cover and not a whole lot of time. So with that being said, we're going to dive directly into our topic of discussion for today. So as mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about, are we witnessing the decline or the fall of the U.S. empire? So depending on who you may be hearing from, there are varying different feelings or thoughts about this particular matter. But by the end of our discussion and presentation today, I'm going to be pointing out some facts to you that will allow you to make a realistic decision for yourself as to what the current state of the U.S. is and where we are going from here. All right, so when we talk about a decline in an empire, the United States is a very big global power. They have amassed great power economically and militarily throughout the world, as we are well recognized as a world power. But there comes a time in season where everything tends to run its course, and every empire has a fall from grace as well. And in my opinion, the United States is definitely in the midst of that fall from grace. And we're going to be showing you some things that will point out these facts, and then we will put you in a position to make an educated decision for yourself as to what our current state and situation shall be in going forward. All right, so let's get into it. So first thing we want to do, we want to look at some other empires, their existence, and what that fall from grace looked like for them, because we all know that history has a point of repeating itself. So when we look at some other great nations and empires, the fall of the empires are the ones who had great power. And it is not something that happens overnight, but it is a result of years of bad decision making, a lot of greed and arrogance that has given that empire that feeling of invincibility. And that will certainly lead to their own demise. And this is exactly what we are seeing here within the United States. And this is not the beginning stages of the demise, as I spoke about earlier, but more towards the irreversible ending. So there has been too much damage to change the current trajectory that the United States is on. And that's why I feel like we are definitely in a position where we're going to eventually fall from that place of being the global power that is looked upon by the rest of the world. So the rise and fall of most empires pretty much looks the same in each instance. They all start off with a strong period of prosperity, with the creation of wealth for many within that country, and then greed starts to kick in and their debt starts to rise. The wealth gap between the wealthy and the rich, it starts to widen. Politics turn bitter as the people turn on one another. Trust is lost amongst the people, and while all of this is happening, the empire wraps itself up in its own little bubble or cocoon, a position of isolation to protect itself from perceived foreign enemies. But all it is doing is putting itself in a position that the outside forces cannot help them to break the fall, and this only expedites the fall of the empire from their position of power. So, do any of these traits sound familiar to you? So, here are some of the most dominant previous empires and how long they have reigned in power. And let me just bring up my slides here and show you some of the last major empires that we're going to be focusing on. All right, so the first one here, we're going to talk about the British Empire, which was the largest empire in history, spanning regions across North America, Asia, Africa, and Australia, covering nearly a quarter of the world's land by 1920. The British Empire began in the late 16th century, spanning across 13.7 million square miles, and its peak was in the year of 1920. It later was dissolved through mid 20th century decolonization, ending with Hong Kong's handover in 1997 to China. And that marks the final chapter of the British Empire coming to a close. Now, the next empire that we're going to look at is the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire was a massive historical monarchy spanning Eurasia from 1721 to 1917. Founded by Peter I, it was ruled by the Romanov dynasty and governed through absolute autocracy until collapsing in the 1917 revolution. The empire covered 8.8 million square miles in 1895 and collapsed during the 1917 Russian Revolution and transformed into the Soviet Union, which we know of it as today. All right, and the next empire that we're going to look at is the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was very powerful and it was very long lasting. Islamic State founded by Osman I in 1299 and lasting until 1922. So you can see they had a very, very long run as a global power. And it spanned parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And it was dissolved in 1922 to 1923 after World War I and replaced by the Republic of Turkey. So that is the Ottoman Empire. And the fourth empire we're going to look at is the Mongol Empire. The Mongolian Empire was the largest connected land empire in history, founded by Genghis Khan in 1206 and lasting until 1368. At its peak, it covered 9 million square miles and stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. So that is the Mongolian Empire. And the last empire that we're going to look at is the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire lasted from 27 BC to 1453 AD. Its main phases included the unified Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, and the Eastern Empire. The Eastern Empire have survived from Constantinople, which is the ancient name of the modern day Istanbul, Turkey, until it fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. So when we look at all of these different empires and their fall from grace, there are certain things that they all have in common. So when an empire starts to feel like they're losing their grip on the global rankings, they're losing their power within the region that they were known to dominate, they start to lash out and look for other means to conquer other territories, meaning they tend to overextend themselves and branch out, launching preemptive or aggressive military strikes to prove strength, often in other regions where stakes are low, but a show of force shows their complete dominance. So what has the US been doing to prove their dominance? So let's look at it. If you can remember, the earlier part of this year and going into last year, the United States was making threats against Canada to make it one of the states of the United States. Or what about the threats against Greenland and a current and consistent threat to take over that land and make it a US territory as well? To capture their natural resources of rare earth minerals and other resources, which are much needed components in order to make some of the weapons that the US needs to replenish very badly. So one of those resources are rare earth materials, and they are so important because they enable high performance magnets, power clean energy, tech like electric vehicles, and drive critical defense systems. This group of 17 distinct metallic elements possess unique magnetic, fluorescent, and conductive traits that make modern technology smaller, faster, and much, much stronger. Another big threat that the US made and ultimately delivered upon was to punish Venezuela. And the United States targeted and invaded Venezuela to remove their president, Nicolas Maduro, on January 3rd of 2026, an unprecedented act that will have to be ruled upon by the international law committees to see if this indeed is an international crime. With the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, the U.S. gained secure access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves, which should also be looked upon by the international law crimes. And this set the stage for the attack on Iran, spearheaded and orchestrated by Israel. In President Trump's first tenure in office as President of the United States, his military officials were well seasoned military men of honor and of great moral standards. But in Trump's second term in office, he had most of these military officials removed from their respective positions and replaced by a bunch of yes men, starting out with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who has changed the name of his title to the Secretary of War. And that should tell you everything that you need to know about the direction this country is moving in. So, with these yes men in place and Israel leading the way, these two nuclear powered countries synchronized attacks against Iran on February 28th of 2026 this year. And during this attack, some governmental facilities and infrastructure were bombed, resulting in the assassination of the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran. And he is also the leader of the entire Persian Gulf region. And this assassination united all of Iran and many other Persian Gulf countries against the United States and Israel. And this is the last thing that the United States expected, because what they were told by Israel is if they can take out the leader, the supreme leader, then the entire country of Iran would fall and go into civil war. But it was exactly the opposite that transpired. Once the supreme leader was assassinated, that unified the entire country and the Persian Gulf region as well, and brought the people together and come against the one common enemy, who was now the United States and, of course, Israel. So the first thing that we need to know is that Russia and China are allies of Iran. And the last thing that they want to see is for Iran to fall. So China and Russia have been supplying Iran with weapons and intelligence to work against the US and Israel. And this has proven to be very helpful in aiding Iran. And the second thing that we need to look at are the countries within the Persian Gulf region, where the US has military bases with soldiers and equipment that was used in the attacks against Iran. So Iran's position is, if these Persian Gulf countries allowed the US to use the aircraft, refueling stations, the radars, or any other military equipment that was located within their Persian Gulf countries, then you are guilty of attacking Iran as well. and I completely understand their position with that. So therefore, when the war began, Iran sent off missiles into Israel and all of the other Persian Gulf countries that allowed the US to use their military bases against Iran. So when Iran first started retaliating against their neighbors, I really thought they were committing suicide. But little did I know how powerful Iran truly was. So let's look at the other US conspirators in the Persian Gulf, or the other countries that have US military bases. So the first country that we want to look at in the Persian Gulf is the country of Bahrain, and they host the Naval Support Activity, which serves as the headquarters for the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet and the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command. The other Persian Gulf country we want to look at is Qatar, and this is the home of the massive Al Qadid Air Base and the largest U.S. facility in the Middle East and the forward regional headquarters for the U.S. Central Command. Another Persian Gulf country we want to look at is the country of Kuwait, and this operates multiple key logistics and key army installations, including Camp Arifjad and Ali Al Salam Air Base. Another one is the United Arab Emirates, and this utilizes the Al Khafari Air Base for air operations and surveillance, alongside access to commercial ports like Jebel Ali. And another country there with U.S. military bases is one of the largest countries there. Well, actually, it is the largest country, and that is Saudi Arabia. And they host the defense deployments, advanced radar, and missile defense installments. And the last one is the country of Oman, and they maintain logistical access agreements and facilities usage at locations like Masara Island, Thermits, and the port of Dugam, rather than large-scale bases. So 6 different countries in the Persian Gulf have U.S. bases and were attacked by Iran at some point. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, did Iran want to attack all of these neighbors? Of course not. But it had to make a very critical decision that will determine their survival or demise. And that was either they retaliate or they continue to allow these other Persian Gulf countries to have their countries used to attack them via their military U.S. bases. So Iran knew that if they damaged or destroyed these military bases within the region, it would be a great benefit to them over time. They just had to ride out the initial attacks coming from the US and Israel and some of their other Gulf Coast neighbors who had to respond because Iran had bombed them. And as the war went on and Iran started to destroy these military bases and other facilities in these Persian Gulf countries, these Persian Gulf countries put in a call to the United States president for them to send some missile defense interceptors to keep the missiles from detonating on their land and destroying their infrastructure. But the US declined to do so. Why? Because as we stated in the beginning, when empires are on the decline, they tend to overextend themselves and make their position worse than it already is. So remember now, in the war going on in Russia and Ukraine, the US was supplying weapons to Ukraine, and they were supplying them with a substantial amount of weapons. And we also have military bases throughout the entire world. And all of these bases have to be stockpiled with various ammunitions in the event of a conflict in those regions. And being that the US is overextended and running low on ammunition, it had to prioritize where it could afford to see their missiles and the US decided that the Persian Gulf countries were not worthy of those defense missiles. So they had to suffer the consequences of facing retaliation from Iran all by themselves. And this was a slap in the face to these countries because the US was using their intercepting missiles to defend Israel, but not to defend any of the Persian Gulf countries or the military that were on those bases. So, what message was the US sending to these countries? They were saying, you are irrelevant. And this would turn out to be another big mistake. So by this time, Iran had already shut down the Straits of Hormuz. And across the world, we saw our first rise in fuel prices because ships were no longer able to bring fuel in and out of the region. Now, this causes some great financial strain for all of these Persian Gulf countries, as well as become, as well. Now, this caused great financial strain for all of these Persian Gulf countries as well, because oil and fuel is their main source of income. So, being that Iran has now taken over control of the Hormuz Strait and has authority over who can come in and who can go out of the Persian Gulf, they are now in the driver's seats. So, as stated earlier, China is an ally of Iran. Therefore, vessels coming from China are allowed to travel freely within the Persian Gulf region and purchase oil as they please. So before the year of 2018, the United States had great control of the oil coming out of the Persian Gulf region. Why? Because they had a system in place, and this system was called the petrodollar system, which means if you were looking to buy oil from these Gulf Coast countries, you would have to purchase that oil in US dollar or using the petro system. And the way that you would do this is you would have to be buying US Treasury bonds or US debt. And this also led to a lot of overextension by the United States. And when it comes to debt, but now that China has created an agreement with these Persian Gulf countries to purchase oil using their own currency, China no longer has to purchase US debt to buy oil. It can buy it direct and cut out the United States completely. And now this is really where things are going to really get very, very complicated for the United States. So with that being in place, Iran is not allowing any US or Israeli vessels or any of their allies to enter into the Persian Gulf to try to purchase oil from that region. So they are being cut off from the oil supplies in this part of the country, of the world. So this is also going to have a great impact on the amount of debt that the US has already accumulated. And the current debt stands at over 39 trillion, and it is increasing by $12.6 billion per day just on interest alone. So this is debt we will never be able to pay off and will lead to a financial collapse that was, very highly anticipated even well before the fuel and energy crisis that we are currently involved with now with this war in Iran. So this is just adding more fuel to the fire and adding on to the problems at hand. So are you starting to see the bigger picture and how this is going to really be a very big problem as time continues on and these things start to just accumulate and get worse and worse and worse? So our leaders are compounding the problem, and it's looking bleaker and bleaker each and every day. So let's fast forward to today, August 5th. President Trump knows that he's out of options and bluffs. Iran is not going for it, and the longer he takes to reach a deal and actually stick to the deal that he agrees to, the more painful it will be for us, the people. Because President Trump doesn't really care. He will be well protected and isolated in his own little world, if not brought up on charges along with the rest of his cronies. So the United States is running out of time, and Iran knows, and the rest of the world starting to realize this as well, that the US has no more cards to play. All of the bluffs coming from the US president have been called by Iran with no further actions, and this is showing the rest of the world that the US is all but powerless in their threats to escalate the war, and Iran knows that the US is very limited in what they can do militarily, and this is a big problem for a government that doesn't have any other strategic plans when it comes to getting things done in their favor. So Iran now has all of the leverage, and the US will have to give in to their demands or suffer the consequences. Iran is being very patient and letting the US dig their own grave, as they knew they would, and now we are about to be buried in a hole that this president has dug for himself. The US has just about depleted most of their long-range missiles and missile interceptors, so they cannot escalate the war even if they really wanted to. And now Iran is just firing on US military bases in the region, begging for the US to respond. And they want to wipe out the rest of the ammunition that the United States has left. So they are just prodding to provoke the US to continue to fire their retaliation missiles and their intercepting missiles, because they want to completely deplete the United States supply of their arms and ammunition. But that's not the worst part. So if you remember, a few weeks ago, we saw the cost of fuel starting to fall back down and come back to more reasonable levels. Well, the reason why the prices of fuel were dropping was because we were using our fuel reserve supply. And through most projections, this should be our last week of fuel before these reserve tanks start to run dry. And then we are looking at no more fuel supplies until who knows when. And if we don't have fuel, the entire economy is going to come to a crashing halt. And Iran knows this, and they are just playing the waiting game and waiting for the US to beg for mercy. But this administration has brought a lot of these problems on itself. Don't get me wrong, many of the problems that we face here in America started a long time ago, long before Trump even came into office. And I'm sure they will continue long after he is gone out of office. But President Trump has deeply exposed America for what it is, and things will never be the same. So, as we will have firsthand witness, unfortunately, to the fall of America as a world power while giving birth to a new power in the Middle East. So well done, America. The rest of the world awaits you. And as the old saying goes, be careful how you treat people on your way up, because you will surely meet them on your way coming down. So the US has put itself in a position in which it will have to beg for mercy and hope that they are not treated in the same manner in which they have treated some of these other countries across the world when they had their position of great dominance throughout the world. So, as you can see through some of these details and information that we have pointed out this afternoon, this evening, we're in a very compromised position. We are very low on ammunition, missiles, intercepting missiles. So we're really at Iran's mercy, so to speak, because if they decided that they wanted to escalate the war and they started to strike against Israel or any of the other countries in the Persian Gulf over there, there's really not much that any of these countries can do to defend themselves. You know, they will just be at the mercy of Iran. But fortunately, Iran is not a terroristic state as what they have been pointed out to be. In my vantage point, I have not seen them carry out the actions that have been carried out against them. All they have done is retaliated in response to any strikes that went against them. They didn't initiate any attacks. So it's very hard to try to justify the claims that the United States and Israel is making when it comes to why they initially attacked Iran, because it has been stated by many officials in the US government that Iran was not demonstrating any willingness to create a nuclear bomb, as they were said to be on the verge of creating, as to initially why the US and Israel attacked them in the first place. So there really was no legitimate reason for this war to take place other than Israel wanted to be the dominant power in that region, the Middle East region. And they knew that if they could take Iran out of the picture and remove them as one of the powers, then that would give Israel total autonomy over the area, over the region, and they can pretty much do whatever they want without facing any repercussions, as they have already done there in Gaza and the West Bank with the ongoing genocide that is going over in that area. Excuse me. But Iran has shown great restraint. They have shown great patience because in the previous agreements of deals or negotiations of agreements that Iran has been in with the United States, the previous 2 or 3 times they were sitting down to negotiate with actual leaders in place. That is when the United States or Israel bombed their leaders and assassinated them while they were in a place to meet to have ongoing negotiations before the war actually started. And that was, very disappointing act, a very cruel act, in bad faith for the United States to do that. Um, when you bring someone to the table to try and negotiate a peace deal, and then you just kill and assassinate those people at that time, then what does that say about you? You are the one that is untrustworthy. You are the one that is acting as a terroristic state. And for that, you will be punished. May it not be by Iran or any other foreign power, but you will have consequences to pay for your actions. The United States and Israel will have to pay the price. And we are seeing it. We are witnessing it for ourselves. And as time goes on, God continues to harden the heart of these leaders. And they're not going to accept a deal until they're put into a place where they have no other choice, or they meet their own demise and someone else is put in place. And then we might see some things start to change. But as far as I can tell, as long as these leaders are in place, it's very unlikely that a real agreement will be put in place in which they will not renege upon like they have been doing. So yeah, it's just very disappointing. It's very discouraging to see um, the position that this country has evolved into. Um, but not surprised because if you know like I know, then we've seen it all before. I mean, this is nothing new, but it's still very discouraging to see that some things never change until you have a different philosophy, a different ideology. And I do not see that changing anytime in the very near future. So, with that being said, that's going to conclude our discussion for today. Please, by all means, leave us some comments in the chat section. I would love to hear your feedback. Tell me what your thoughts are. Do you feel as if the U.S. is in a state of decline? Do you feel like if we can recover from this? And how do you feel about the current situation and where you're living at? Um, it's going to be troubled times and seasons. It's going to be some real strong storms that we're going to have to weather in the coming months ahead. But, we are resilient in all of our ways. And, we shall get through this like everything else before, but we have to remain focused on our goals and objectives, not be distracted by all of the things going on in the world, some things in which we have no control over, but we just have to prepare ourselves to take the best possible course of actions, look out for one another, and just stay clear on our goals and objectives in life, and be of high moral standards in everything in which we do. So, once again, I want to thank you all for watching and being a part of the broadcast this afternoon. Once again, my name is Rob McCray from the Business Building Network. And please, if you have not already done so, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As you can see it scrolling across the bottom of your screen, and it is What's Holding You Back Now. And we air every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the What's Holding You Back Now YouTube channel. So be blessed, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you next week on the next edition of What's Holding You Back.
What's holding you back? Holding you back from touching the sky. What's holding you back? You gotta fly like an eagle and go high. What's holding you back? Holding you back from touching the sky. Oh, holding you back. You finally gotta reach for the sky.